Greetings, trombonists at large. I am the Vega Trombone, and I'm here tonight to talk to you a little bit about sight reading. A student asked me about how to improve their sight reading, and so I thought I'd answer that question here. And first off, I'm going to make the assumption that we all have a basic idea of how to sight read. You know to start, at the left-hand side of the page and read your clef. Always remember to read your clef, because as a trombone player, bass clef, tenor clef, alto clef, treble clef, and bass clef in B flat sometimes are keys that you will see. Not keys, clefs that you will see. And so then you go to your key signature, and everyone should know their scales. You should always know your scales. And then you have your time signature. So I assume we all know what a time signature is, how to interpret those time signatures, 3-4-4-4-2-4, and know how to scan through the form of the piece to identify the form. Is it sonata form? Is it some other form? Is there a 4-bar turnaround here and there? And be able to tell what the roadmap reads like for the repeats, for any Dalsenios or codas that might be in the music. You want to be able to spot those things, and then to look at block rhythms and be able to identify rhythmic repetitions. And if you know your scales, if you see accidentals, you'll know that either you're in an implied key, or you're in a bridge section, or maybe if it's a run, you can kind of interpret those things out. And these are all things that we know to do. And as in basic sight reading, another basic sight reading mantra are your 3 breakdowns: rhythm, tempo, and notes. Now, you always want to be playing the right rhythm in the right time, and it's great if it's the right note. But if you are playing the wrong note at the right time, at least you're half right. Whereas if you play a note that it might be in the key, so it sounds right, but it's in the wrong place and you're playing an arrest, it's all wrong. So that doesn't help you out. Those kinds of things. I'm going to make the assumption that we all are aware of that. So how do you bump up your game to the next level? When I was in high school, I was not a very good sight reader. I was as good as the best of the sight readers to a degree, and I was better than the bulk of the sight readers, but only for the advantage of having been a piano player when I was a child. And so I was familiar with beamings and how to interpret those beamings. Like if I saw it was in 6/8 and I saw that it was beamed in 3s, then I knew that it was in 2 compound time, not in 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And those kinds of things. And let me tell you, that's an advantage when you know the difference between common time and 4/4. Yeah, there isn't one. Yes, exactly. And so just knowing those kinds and all my scales, just knowing those things was an advantage. Also knowing that if I saw any accidentals, I knew I should go and look at those notes, because it meant that in a run it might be chromatic, it might go ba ba doo doo ba doo ba doo da doo doo ba doo da, right? And I knew to pay attention to the tricky bits in the music. So that I was one of the better readers, but I was not a great reader in high school. And when I got to college, I was driving around, and I realized when I was playing with a friend, I realized why. It's because I had reading glasses for reading books because I had bad astigmatism, but I didn't have reading glasses for reading music. I didn't need glasses if I wasn't reading at that time. And so I found out that sight reading really is a lot better when you can see your music. So I got a distance pair of sight reading glasses. Now they're called, I think, computer distance glasses is what I think last time I got my prescription changed a couple of months ago. They gave me computer glasses. And it makes all the difference in the world when you can see the music. Right there, that's going to be an improvement. Take you up to the next level like that. So how do you get better? Let's just mention that if you already have the basics of sight reading and you want to improve that skill, the only way to really get better from there is to listen to a lot of music and read voraciously a lot of music. And even reading books is an advantage. I used to read out loud to myself and try to scan ahead, look ahead and down at the words and speak out loud while I was reading to practice my forward scanning when I would be playing. Because when you're playing and you're trying to hit those rhythms, if you can scan ahead and see the rhythms, it kind of gives you that advanced warning. I knew people who could look at whole lines, 2 or 3 lines, and just they would be right in their head, and amazing sight readers. And like I said, I had a friend who was an incredible sight reader, and one of the things that it gave me the insight for was, man, you got to read a lot of music, and you got to be able to see the music. You have to have good sight to be able to read it, and then you've got to read a lot of music, and to get up from a to a higher level. And those things, I'm just going to take advantage of the fact that most of us were already there. Like my student, she already knows how to read, and she's not a bad reader, but she wanted to up her game to the next level because she was finding that she was reading music with her band, and she couldn't keep up. So the first thing that you need to do when you want to up your game in sight reading is you need to develop and work on an inherent sense of time and tempo. You need to know what that tempo is and always know where one is when you're reading, because sometimes if you have to drop a beat, if something looks too hard and you decide you're just going to lay it out, you have to know where to come back in to stay on top of that time. So having an inherent understanding of tempo and time is really critical. How do you develop those skills? We could talk about that, but I want to kind of, I guess, do an overview, and maybe I'll go into those other skills and development of those skills another time. But let's just keep on moving and move over that. And so after you have developed a good sense of time, the next thing that you want to have is good common sense. Know when to lay out. If you know that you're going to be able to get back in, if you see something coming out and it's got lots of black dots and scary stuff on it, and you scan ahead, you can isolate measures you know you can nail. So, and you can also see that maybe it's going to be a little left-footed. You don't want to take the chance and just crash and burn. So you want to lay that out. But then, if someone else does try to play it, and they play it wrong, you still need to know where one is so that you can come in and be a hero and save the day. So, knowing where to lay out is as important a skill as knowing what to play when you see it. And and what I was mentioning about scanning ahead, as you read, you need to be able to scan ahead. But another thing is that is important about upping your game in sight reading is knowing style. And not just the style of the era, but the style of the composer. What style did they prefer to write in? Because each composer might be writing in a 30s swing style, an early 30s swing style, but they have their own idea of how to swing that way. And so if you are familiar with a composer, that's an advantage. But you also need to understand, and I find that it's sometimes more important to know, who's the arranger. Because the arranger oftentimes has certain tricks or vehicles that they like to use in a piece of music. And in the big band era, like when I was playing, I talk a lot about playing in big bands because that's what I did a lot. I played in a lot of dance bands. And we'd play 4-hour gigs. We'd have 1, maybe 2 rehearsals. We'd cover maybe 8 tunes, and they were all the vocalists' tunes. They weren't any of the other tunes that we would have to play, foxtrots and tangos and all these other things. And the trumpet feature, the saxophone feature. And one of the great advantages that I found was knowing who arranged it. Because if I know the arranger, I can kind of get an idea of how they're going to create their their musical color palette. I know what their treatment of a melody might be, and it gives me one less thing to have to think about when I'm trying to interpret a piece of music that I haven't played yet. A lot of this music, I was sight reading it for the first time, and I'm playing with everybody else in the band who's played this stuff a million times. These old guys, I was the youngest guy in the band, right? And I didn't want to sound any less a player, because you got 50 people out in front of you who've paid good money to come and dance. And so on these 4-hour gigs, man, they were readathons for me. It was tricky. And so what I discovered was knowing who arranged it was a big advantage for knowing how to interpret it. And it took one piece off my plate that I needed to worry about when I went to read a piece of music for the very first time in front of 50 of my closest friends. So, style. Understanding the style the composer prefers. Understanding some of their harmonic tricks. Another thing that I had to understand was like Ellington tunes. Strayhorn, the way he arranged. There were a number of times where if I was playing second trombone, I wasn't sure if I was going to be playing the right note, because the arrangements, the tonal palette, the colors were so tight that you really had to nail it and kind of know how to treat that note, that F sharp, and in the chord, to really be able to know how it should go, where it should be, how it should be placed acoustically, and know whether or not I was actually playing the right note. Sometimes I would see music and I would make a mistake, not because I read it wrong, but because I didn't believe it was right. And that happened a lot. A lot of this early music, especially before the advent of computers, they used to write in ballpoint pen, or and some of the chicken scratch we would read, man, it was like I considered that one of my superpowers, was being able to interpret this terrible copy that we would read that was, some dude on a bus or on a train writing charts for his dance band in the middle of the night, before the next gig, before Allentown, And so, some of this stuff was really tricky to read, and sometimes I'd play it wrong just because I didn't believe it was right. And sometimes I would not believe it was right because I didn't know who the arranger was, and that he might actually write that complex. So, knowing these things ahead of time makes it a little less stressful, and having an inherent sense of time and understanding and knowing style of the composer and the arranger, and sometimes looking at the era. It might be a George Gershwin tune, but it's not published in 1933. It's published in 1973 instead. It might be 40 years later, and you need to know that it's going to be a different treatment of that melody, so you can't just approach it like it's Rhapsody in Blue or something like that. That the swing style may be of a later era or a different ilk, and knowing the publication date is always a good cue on how you need to identify that piece of music. And understanding and knowing rhythmic figures for different styles. Ba-doo-da, 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 right? And you want to know that you can identify a Latin tune. I can identify Latin songs or Latin passages in another larger song by the way the rhythms look. And that's also an important part of it. You want to have a very definite understanding of rhythm. Like I said before, the best way to get good at rhythm that I found, for me personally, was understanding that all rhythms are similar to all other rhythms, right? A dotted eighth note with a dotted eighth note with a 16th note is the same as a dotted half note with a quarter note. The way that I got better with rhythm was by doing takedowns of rhythm. Not doing the takedown of the whole chart, but just taking rhythmic figures that I heard during the day, like in a pop tune or on the radio, something like that, and doing a takedown of just those rhythms. That really helped my rhythm. It also helped me remember the rhythm, because sometimes the charts that I heard on a record were the same charts I might bump into in a reading band or a dance band sometime down the road, and I would have familiarity with some of those parts. And so knowing rhythmically the era, knowing rhythmically how to identify the style, is another way of really upping your game as far as sight reading. And the another important aspect of sight reading is being able to know what the song is. Sometimes this can be a curse and a blessing. If you know what the song is and you know the emotive properties of that song and the lyric, it's going to really help you play the song. It doesn't matter whether there's a singer there or not. It might be a ballad for the trumpet, but you've got an idea of what the emotional development of that song is going to be. And again, it's one less thing to have to concentrate on while trying to interpret the dots, lines, and slashes and bric-a-brac that are going to be written across your music, the foreign languages that pop up in certain sections. So by being able to, by being comfortable with identifying the melody, sometimes it makes it easier. Now there is the trap of playing an arrangement that is very similar to an arrangement that you've heard on the radio or maybe even played before, but it isn't the same. And this is where that other piece of upping your game sight reading comes in, and it is focus. You have to be able to hear the band. You have to be able to hear the time, hear the rhythm, hear your note and how it's functioning in the chord, hear your note and how you should play it in conjunction with the other people in your section, while at the same time remaining focused on what's going on. Like I was talking about Strayhorn. When I would read some of these Ellington charts, some of the musical palette would be so amazing that I would start listening to the band and not listening to my section or what's going on, and I would lose my focus and clam. That was a definite clamorama if I was going to lose my focus. So it's really important to maintain your focus while at the same time listening to everything. And how do you get better at listening to everything? You got to play with bands. You got to play with other people. You can't just practice sight reading at home. You have to be willing to put yourself out there and not play so well. Like I said, was not the best sight reader when I was in high school. And in college, I still wasn't that great a sight reader. I didn't really get good at sight reading until I started playing in these big bands and going to a lot of big band rehearsals. I would do 3 or 4 rehearsals a week in big bands. Not at school, I mean like dance bands. And then there were reading bands at the union. Musicians Union had reading bands where you would just go and that someone would come in with a book that had 500 charts or 1,000 charts in it, and you just start fanning through them, and you never read anything twice. You just played it. And so knowing the composer, the arranger, looking at the roadmap, looking at other people's parts where I might see something that looks hard, I could look on the saxophone parts in front of me. I could cheat a little bit and see if they had something that we were playing at the same time, or whether I could just, okay, they're going to play it. Sometimes I would see that they were playing something that we had that was hard. They'd play it first. That gave me an opportunity to listen to them do it, so that I knew that when I got down to letter H or whatever it was our turn to really not try to clam as much as possible. So sometimes the other sections can give you a clue. And so it's not just you personally, it's listening to everyone else. And if you feel uncomfortable about playing with other musicians because you don't feel confident in your sight reading, that is not going to help you. You've got to overcome that. I myself, I had a friend who was a monster sight reader. He still is a monster sight reader. And he's a monster sight reader. And I used to go over to his house, and I would buy duet books, and we'd go over and we would play. And he was always having to wait for me to figure something out. But in doing so, I got to be a better sight reader. Not only that, but sometimes I would listen to him play, and that would pull me along. I knew where to stay with it. And sometimes stylistically, I was more familiar with it than he was, and so we could play off of each other. And there was a give and take. You may have a skill that someone else might be able to use. So don't be afraid to play with other people. It's one of the biggest advantages. and being able to develop your musicality, your ability to sight read, understanding how your instrument blends and plays with other instruments. Even if you're both playing the same instrument, you still need to know how to follow, how to lead when it's your turn to do so. And playing duets is a great way to do that. And by buying all this music, when I started teaching later private students, I had a nice library of music that I was already familiar with, so I could go to my student, and instead of me reading and him reading at the same time or her reading at the same time, I already knew how it went, so I could then focus on them and help them along, or be able to not have to worry about me screwing up, so that, if they were getting it right, there wouldn't be that problem. So don't be afraid to spend money on music. Don't be afraid to spend time playing with other people who might be better than you. And if you do, I guarantee it's going to improve your sight reading. And like I said, maybe I'll do another video about reading rhythms or interpreting time signatures, something like that. But I just wanted to touch on an overview of how you might be able to bump your sight reading up to the next level. And this is what I did, and it worked for me. And you get to a point where you look forward to sight reading pieces. It becomes exciting to be able to see a piece of music and play it for the very first time and make it the challenge, make it sound beautiful. I mean, that's really a great thing when you can sit there and there's 50 people standing out in front of you, 1,000 people sitting out in front of you, and you play a piece of music like it's blood in your veins. It's a great sensation, and I guarantee they'll be happy about it too. So, yeah, sight reading, it's hard to get better. And just remember, good time. Advanced scanning, style, know the style, and be able to listen and remain focused. So until next time.